Welcome to the very first episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy, I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to figure out how to do that more responsibly. I'm really excited to finally be doing this. I feel like this has been a long time coming for me. For those of you who have seen me around the Bridges of Meaning Discord or Paul's channel, you know that I've dabbled in podcasting a little bit, but I've finally decided to take the leap and commit to something on my own, which is scary and exciting all at the same time. And I think overall, I'm looking forward to what this project is and how it will evolve as I move forward. But before I get too much into the whole structure and what I want this to be, I do want this first episode to be a little bit more about myself and my background to give you an idea of who I am. One, because if you're going to sit and listen to me ramble on the internet, I feel like it's only fair you have a little bit of background, but I also think it gives a really helpful understanding of how I got to where I am and where it leads me here into this project and where I want to take it in the future. So, like I said, my name's Cassidy. I'm a filmmaker, I'm an entrepreneur, and for the sake of this podcast, I am an information addict. I can't say I have always had an issue with information consumption. In fact, most of my life I probably avoided trying to learn or process big ideas, full stop. It wasn't because there was any insecurity or feeling that I didn't want to know things or couldn't know things. I think it was just more of emotional immaturity at that time where I didn't have the wherewithal to take on the workload that it took to process those ideas and really think through big questions. And so I kind of went more into an escapism of like YouTube binges and Netflix shows. And that definitely led me down a path where I am now with an interest in media and creating film. But I'm glad that I slowly went out of that phase in college. I think there's a lot of reasons why it sort of shifted for me after I graduated high school. I mean, one, I think the college learning situation was something I was much more suited to than any sort of public middle school, high school, or even private school that I'd ever gone to, because it wasn't like I was forced to go through a program. I opted in to classes that I had a choice to pick, and it gave me this feeling of a participation in the things that I was learning, which was really exciting. And I definitely think that the monetary value of it all really affected how I thought about it. Having a scholarship and someone paying me to go to college classes sort of changed my outlook and made me take it a little bit more seriously and respect it more. But at the end of the day, I think ultimately what created a big shift in me was having an experience right after graduation that made me really confront my relationship with truth, specifically on the question of God and religion. So like most people in America, I grew up religious, grew up in a non-denominational Protestant home, very stereotypically so. I think for a lot of people who grew up the way that I did, they can often cite it as being a source of negativity and made them dislike church. But that definitely wasn't my case. It actually sort of attracted me to it. And I think that has a lot to do with my parents. I was able to see how their belief in God created a lasting change in their lives and switched the direction and made their lives better and made them kinder, more caring, more thoughtful people. And to me, that was really appealing. And although I did believe it to be true, it was another thing that made me want it to be true. It's interesting. I think that if you had asked me growing up if I was a Christian, I probably would have said yes with unwavering certainty. But when I started getting older, I realized that my profession of faith was not really lining up with the way that I lived. And that's not to say I was living this crazy immoral lifestyle. I think for most people who would look at me, they would describe me as a quote unquote good person. But I knew that what I had known Christianity to be and believed it to be was not really being fulfilled in the way that I was living. And I had this sort of lukewarm approach to Christianity that was leaving me super unfulfilled. And I won't go through all of the details, but I had an experience that made me really confront that contradiction and realize how big of a problem it was. And it kind of left me at this crossroads. It was like I could keep going down this road of, believing Christianity, but not really acting like I did, and probably still continue to feel unfulfilled. I could totally pivot and go down this other road of hedonism, doing whatever I wanted, living however I saw fit. And I had known enough people who had gone down that road to realize that that road, where it ended, left people more unfulfilled than the way that I felt now. So it didn't really seem like a genuine option for me. But the third and final option that I kind of saw at that moment was, okay, well, what if I take this God thing seriously and I run at him with everything I have and see if it makes a difference and really live the life that I claim to believe? And I chose that road, and I kind of did it without any expectations, just going down it saying, well, this other thing's not working, so let's just give it a shot. And within 6 months, I had realized that although I didn't have a lot of behavioral changes, my intention shift created this exponential change that made me an entirely different person. And for the first time, I had a purpose, and I felt fulfilled, and I felt eager to take on the world and learn and engage. And that was a totally new experience for me. And I think in that moment, I sort of started to realize I really think that God is real. It's like that moment made him real for me. And I kind of got convinced to keep walking down that road until someone could convince me I should stop. And the only way that they could really do that is to show me a better, truer path than the one I was on. But I wanted to just keep going and follow that truth. So after walking that path, I spent about 2.5 years at home, sort of following God, trying to understand what that means. And then I moved to the Bay Area to go to college. And I think that was the first time I really found myself in a place of uncomfortability. I was from this conservative Christian bubble put into this very liberal, more spiritually open city. And while I was very eager to have that experience, I also was aware of the impact that could make on a faith journey and in my beliefs in general. And so I definitely took that with some seriousness. And what I did very soon after moving to the Bay Area, a lot of people who grew up Christian would probably say was a red flag, but I decided very quickly that I wanted to stop going to church every Sunday. And it wasn't because I stopped believing. It was more of this acknowledgement that I had spent the first 21 years of my life calling myself a Christian in the safety of a church building. And I wanted to know what it meant to be a Christian outside of a building. And the more that I was reading the Gospels and Acts and seeing this early church, the more I felt like the life that I was living there didn't really reflect the way Jesus lived. And I wanted to bring more of that into my life. So I continued to follow God and seek him, but I decided to, instead of going to church, just start engaging other people outside of my faith in questions and conversations about religion. And what I found is that I was not only learning more about what other people believed and getting a better understanding of how they thought, I was getting a lot of clarity on what I believed and deeper nuance on the things that I held sacred. And a lot of those conversations were so life-giving, more life-giving than the ones that I had had in church buildings. And that was really attractive to me. And so I kept chasing that feeling. I spent 2.5 years in the Bay Area doing this experiment. And when I moved to Australia to study abroad, I brought that attitude with me. Now, I didn't know a lot of people when I moved to Australia. I had 3 bags, an Airbnb, and a loose plan of how I was going to make it all work out. And I was definitely flying by the seat of my pants. And the beginning of my time there, it was harder to connect with people, but I did end up connecting with a couple people. But one of them ended up being a pretty militant atheist. And he somehow found out I was a Christian and started asking me questions. And it started with just conversations, but eventually he gave me a book called God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens. When he handed me the book, I remember sitting in a lecture hall and just feeling a wave of fear sort of wash over my whole body. And I remember thinking, man, there could be something in this book that makes me change my mind about the things that I hold most sacred. And that was really scary. But in that same moment, I knew that if I was that scared to read this book, I probably should. And so I started reading the next day, and I expected to not like the book and to dislike the author. But the more that I read, the more that I found Christopher Hitchens to be incredibly endearing. Yes, he was very brash and harsh a lot of the time, but there was a lot of truth in the things that he said. And he asked tough questions. A lot of them I didn't have good answers for. And he didn't change my mind about the God question. But he got me to a place where I could realize how someone wouldn't believe in God, which was never something that I could really understand before, because the idea of a cosmic creator never bothered me. And, I read the book and it definitely left me questions, but, it didn't change my mind. I think it wasn't until 2 weeks later when the presidential election happened that something started to switch in me, and there started to be more of a severity in the shift of the way that I started thinking. So when I went to Australia, I wouldn't say I was very political. In fact, I dislike politics, and I still dislike politics in many ways. But I wasn't aware, and I wasn't informed. But going to Australia and being abroad during a very divisive election made me realize how important our political system is around the world. And it definitely changed my perspective and the way that I should look at it. And in a lot of ways, it became very difficult because people would ask me questions about what was going on in the political system, and I had no idea. And so I had to work through all of these questions that I didn't have answers for. And it was especially difficult with how heated and uncomfortable that specific election was. But all this to say, when the election day came, I didn't want to look at the results, but I figured I should be informed. I'm gonna check the results real quick before I move on with my day. And I meant to be at the computer for 5 minutes, but I ended up staying there for 2 hours, just watching states turn red and blue, and eventually seeing that Trump had become president. And I'll admit I was angry, and a lot angrier than I thought I would be. And I didn't understand why. Now, granted, I was not a fan of Trump. But that being said, I wasn't a huge fan of Hillary either. So the fact that he won, it didn't quite compute to the level of frustration that I was feeling. And I started to unpack that and try to understand, why am I feeling this thing? And at the end of the day, I realized I'm angry because I was told this could never happen. I'd been spoon-fed this narrative that Trump could never be president, and I bought it without even questioning it. And it started to get me thinking, well, what else have I been believing without questioning it? And that thought led to a whole host of unhealthy behaviors that would lead to existential crises and a lot of crumbling and confidence in the things that I could hold to be true. So the next few days after the election, I started to go on an information consumption binge and went into this spiral that was incredibly unhealthy. And when I compare it now to what I had done before, I can see that it wasn't this genuine, eager, open search to try to understand people and ideas better. It became more of this control mechanism to help feel like my world was stop crumbling. Because that's really how it felt for a long time, that all of these things that I had believed for a long time were starting to fall apart. And this foundation that I thought was strong turned out to just be built on toothpicks. And if I didn't do something quick, everything was going to fall apart. And it led me to some really dark places. And it kind of got me to the place where I started to realize that no matter how much I tried to stop it, it was going to fall apart. It was going to crumble. And there wasn't anything that I could do about that. So instead of working towards trying to fix this thing that was falling apart, I kind of leaned into it and let it fall and tried stripping everything away so that I could rebuild my life and my beliefs on things that I could understand and hold to be true. The problem was I didn't really know how to do that. So the last 4 years has been this slow journey of trying to figure out, well, how do I come to an understanding of what is true? How do I build my beliefs? How do I consume information better? And I'll admit I've made a lot of mistakes as I moved through that. I think I've learned a lot, and, I've come to an understanding of better of what I believe. And today I still find myself to be a Christian, but it's a different version of that. And it's still in the process of trying to reconstruct that and make it something healthy. I think a lot of people have been talking about deconstruction lately, and it often gets looked at in a negative light, especially in Christian communities. In atheist communities, it's celebrated, but for Christian communities, there's this fear of it. And I always found that fear to be understandable, but not always helpful. Because I look at my life and I see the way that I deconstruct it and find good in it. But because I stripped everything away and rebuilt and found a better meaning. If we leave everything deconstructed, yes, that's a problem. But having that time to work through things and reconstruct things is really good. And I'd love to find a way to help people embrace that more. So for a long time, I walked this journey alone, trying to figure out everything on my own in isolation. And it led me to insanity. But in the last year, I have gotten connected with the Bridges of Meaning Discord community that was launched from Paul Vanderklay's channel. And it's been incredibly helpful and helped me regain some of that more positive side that I had seen previously about the way that I consume information, and removed me away from some of this addictive behavior most of the time. Sometimes it's still bad, but I've learned to put the tools in to help me do it better. But through that, I have grown so much, and I feel like my thoughts and ideas have expanded, which is a really good thing. But I've hit a wall here, and I've started to feel like all of this stuff that's built up in my head, I need to do something with it, or it's going to start to ooze out in really negative ways. I felt like this probably for the last 6 months, and I'm finally led me here to doing this podcast as a way to kind of reorganize my thoughts and get a better handle on what this is and working with others to do those things. I'm excited to do all that. I'm nervous to do it too, but I think that this will ultimately be something that's a positive thing. So if you've gotten this far and you want to continue on a journey and feel that you've had a similar experience that I had, I would love for you to listen and go along with me and help me as I'm trying to figure out how to be a more responsible information consumer myself. Okay, so here's the deal. The goal of this podcast is to be more intentional about what I'm consuming and how I'm consuming, and the way that I'm using that to help build my beliefs and get to truth. The second overall goal is to work with others who want the same thing. Because I had spent so much time alone and realizing the need to have a community to get closer to ideas, I want that to be a big part of what I'm doing here. So ultimately, this podcast is going to come out in two forms. One are going to be monologue videos like this, where I work through ideas, issues, break down things that I find fascinating, pretty loose and structured. I don't want to be too tight in a box. I want this to evolve the way it needs to, but general topic of information and how we consume those sort of things. And the second type of videos are going to be long form conversations, a lot of them going to be with friends, family, or just people I find interesting, and work together with people and talk about things that, we want to talk about and unpack those things and, practice that ability to work through ideas with people you agree with and disagree with and create a more civil conversation. So yeah, like I said, I want to keep it loose as far as structure because I've decided going into this, I only want to do this as long as it keeps servicing myself and other people. If it's not doing those things, it can't continue the way that it is. So that means it either needs to evolve in its form or function, or I need to rethink the way that I'm producing content, which may mean shutting this down. And so I just want to create that room where I don't feel like I'm putting myself in a box and creating it too tight of a formula where it doesn't give it the ability to grow. I have a tendency to run before I can walk, which can often lead me to a lot of fun and interesting experiences, but there's a lot of negative sides to it and definitely can lead to burnout. And I don't want that to happen with this podcast. So to start, I'm going to be releasing once a week and just trying to create things that I think are helpful and are servicing myself. And we'll keep going and see what we go from there. But as part of that, I would love for anybody who's watching and is engaged in this, if you have suggestions and there are things that you want to hear about or work through, I want to do that with you. I want to be engaged in that. So definitely feel free to be a part of that in the comments and reach out to kind of make this service you as well. So it's not just me and we're working together to do those things and be more responsible at the way we're consuming. So I've decided that I want to end each episode by reciting the Serenity Prayer for a couple reasons. The first of all, I figured I should probably just lean into this shameless appropriation of the AA 12-step model and just give a little homage to the thing that has inspired this podcast a little bit. But I also think that the words of that prayer have a lot to say about the way that we consume information and come to our beliefs, and hold a lot of wisdom in that journey and the pursuit towards those things. So I want to keep those words in my mind as I go and continue to walk this journey and trying to unpack these really difficult concepts and conversations. So that being said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks so much.